Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're embarking on quite a journey into the really complex world of global trade, sanctions, and, well, what many people see as some pretty glaring double standards. Our mission for you is to peel back the layers, to try and unpack this seemingly contradictory reality of how major Western powers are, engaging with Russia.
Right.
Even while they're actively condemning, even criticizing other nations for doing similar things.
It's definitely a crucial topic, especially now as we see these huge ripple effects from geopolitical decisions hitting economies everywhere. I mean, right down to the price of goods in your local shop.
Absolutely.
And we've gathered a stack of really intriguing sources. We've got detailed trade data reports, analyses from international bodies, recent government statements, and even a pretty candid interview transcript with a former U.S. president. And all these pieces, they come together to paint a nuanced picture, often quite surprising, actually, about what's genuinely happening behind the headlines.
Exactly. Because on one hand, you hear this strong, unwavering rhetoric, right? Isolate Russia, cripple their war efforts, stand united.
The United Front narrative.
But then you look at the raw numbers, the actual trade figures, and they tell a very different story. We're talking billions of dollars. Critical goods still flowing between Russia and the West.
It's quite the disconnect.
So for this deep dive, we'll be exploring exactly that profound disconnect, and asking, is this principled action a necessary evil, maybe? Or is it just, pragmatic reality that, from certain angles, looks a lot like a double standard?
Yeah, where's the line?
Get ready. We're hoping to uncover some surprising facts and give you a really well-informed, clear-eyed perspective on this whole dynamic. So, okay, let's unpack this first part.
Yeah.
Think back to February 2022. Russia invades Ukraine.
Right.
And the U.S., the EU, they very loudly position themselves as these champions of democratic values. Swift, sweeping sanctions follow, aimed at crippling Moscow's war economy.
We all heard the statements. Unprecedented unity. A moral imperative, they said, to cut economic ties.
Exactly. But our sources, particularly this really compelling analysis, double standards or principles. Why the U.S. and EU trade with Russia while criticizing India. It reveals a much, much messier reality unfolding by 2025.
Yeah, what really stands out here is the stark contrast. It's almost jarring.
How so?
While Russia's overall exports to the U.S. and EU have definitely fallen significantly from pre-war levels, that's true.
Okay.
Billions of dollars in critical goods are still moving westward. Legally. Openly.
Critical goods.
Yeah. And at the same time, nations like India, who are buying discounted Russian oil, find themselves facing really significant criticism.
Like the tariff threats.
Exactly. We saw former President Trump floating a potential 50% tariff on Indian goods, and specifically citing their continued trade with Russia.
Yeah.
It's a striking example of a policy that seems to apply quite differently depending on who's doing the trading.
At India, as our sources show, they're not just taking this quietly, are they?
No, not at all. Their Ministry of External Affairs has pretty vehemently called out what they see as unjustified and unreasonable targeting.
Their argument being?
Their argument is basically, look, our oil imports are driven by the sheer domestic energy needs of 1.4 billion people. It's not about making a political statement.
Just keeping the lights on, essentially.
Right. And what's even more fascinating, and often gets overlooked, is that a significant chunk of that Russian oil India refines. It actually ends up being shipped to Europe as refined products, like diesel.
No kidding. So it loops back.
It's a complex supply chain. It really challenges that simple black and white narrative you often hear.
So this really forces us to ask that question, doesn't it? Is this a truly principled, consistent approach from the U.S. and EU on sanctions?
Or does it, like many suggest, hint pretty strongly at a kind of strategic double standard?
Because the numbers.
Look at the numbers. The U.S. Census Bureau data, trade in goods with Russia. It clearly shows U.S. imports from Russia, just in the first half of 2025, totaled $2.49 billion.
$2.5 billion. Just in 6 months.
Exactly. And this is happening even as other trade categories have absolutely plummeted. It really underscores a highly selective approach. Some goods are off limits, others apparently are just too important to cut off.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting. Maybe a bit uncomfortable even. Because right after the invasion, the rhetoric was so uncompromising. Sweeping measures, bans on oil, coal, luxury goods, high-tech exports.
Total isolation seemed to be the goal.
Both the U.S. and EU publicly pledged to phase out Russian energy completely. It felt like this truly unified, decisive stand.
It did.
So what happened? What changed between that moment of absolute resolve and the reality we're seeing now? What forced them to carve out all these exceptions?
Well, the from outrage to exception section in one of our key sources explains it pretty clearly. A full, immediate decoupling. It was, quite simply, never realistic, not without triggering severe domestic crises.
Okay, like what specifically? Give us some examples.
Right. Take Russian uranium. It's absolutely essential. It fuels something like 20% of the U.S.'s nuclear power capacity.
20%, wow.
Imagine the energy shock if that supply just vanished overnight.
Okay, point taken. And the EU?
The EU had this huge reliance on Russian natural gas for heating homes, powering its massive industrial sector, and for both the U.S. and the EU, fertilizers.
Ah, fertilizers. We keep hearing about those.
Fertilizers from Russia and its ally Belarus aren't just important, they are absolutely critical. Global agricultural supply chains depend on them. Cutting them off impacts food prices, food availability worldwide.
So the interconnectedness just made a clean break impossible.
In the short term, yes. Almost impossible without causing chaos at home.
So it wasn't really about a lack of political will then, more about this fundamental, deep-seated economic dependency.
Largely, yes. But is it just that? Or is
Yeah.
there maybe a bit of political convenience mixed in? Because, the U.S. Treasury's own sanctions documents list various general licenses.
Right, you mentioned those. What are they?
They explicitly authorize activities that would otherwise be prohibited by the sanctions. So this isn't just accidental trade slipping through the cracks. It shows the system is actually designed to allow exceptions when they're deemed necessary for national interest.
So they built escape hatches into the sanctions from the start.
That's a crucial distinction. You've nailed it. These aren't necessarily blatant violations. They are carefully engineered exemptions, pre-approved waivers, grace periods.
Okay.
And these mechanisms are put in place precisely to prevent that severe economic disruption at home in the sanctioning countries themselves.
Is there other evidence for this?
Yeah, the congressional report on the economic impact of sanctions, it corroborates this. It notes explicitly that because everyone was worried about global energy market stability,
Right.
the U.S. and its allies generally stopped short of imposing those really sweeping worldwide restrictions on Russian energy trade. It highlights this constant balancing act, geopolitical goals versus very real domestic economic needs.
Okay, let's dive into some hard numbers now, because this is where the picture of these strategic imports really solidifies, right?
Absolutely.
When we look at the actual trade data for 2024, 2025, the persistence of these imports is just undeniable. It really puts the scale of these dependencies into perspective for you listening.
Indeed. Okay, so for the United States in 2024, the data we've got outlines some key imports from Russia that kept flowing despite everything.
Number one,
Fertilizers. We're talking approximately $1.1 billion.
$1 billion worth.
And get this, one source noted a huge 21% increase year over year in U.S. fertilizer imports from Russia between January and May 2025 alone. That reached $806 million, a figure actually higher than before the war.
Higher. How is that possible as sanctions?
Specific tariff exemptions. Because Russia is just such a massive supplier, particularly for things like potash and nitrogen fertilizers, which need natural gas, the argument is food security. Without them, global food prices would spike even more.
Okay, what else?
Palladium. Imports hit $878 million.
What's palladium used for again?
Crucial for catalytic converters in cars. Also electronics, dentistry. Russia is the world's biggest producer. While the value is down from the peak in 2021, imports still jumped 37% year on year in early 2025. Finding alternatives quickly is incredibly hard.
Right. Next,
Enriched uranium, valued at $624 million for the year.
the nuclear fuel.
Exactly. Imports barely dropped compared to 2021 and actually surged 28% year on year in the first part of 2025, up to $596 million. And remember, those waivers for U.S. companies, they extend until 2028.
2028. Wow.
This isn't pocket change. It's fuel for a big chunk of U.S. nuclear power. Building new enrichment facilities takes years, maybe decades.
Any other standout?
A smaller one, but telling. Aircraft engine parts, about $75 million worth, even with broad defense sanctions in place, shows very specific niche dependencies remain.
So, okay, if you add those up, those four categories alone were, what, 90% of all U.S. imports from Russia in 2024, just over $3 billion?
That's right, a significant sum.
Now, let's shift focus. The EU, they have cut imports drastically, right? Like 86% since 2021.
They have, yes. Major reduction.
But even so, that double standards or principles article says they still traded. $67.5 billion with Russia in 2024.
Still a substantial number.
So what are they still buying? Similar things.
Yes, similar patterns of dependency emerge.
Fertilizers again?
Fertilizers, big one. EU imported $1.81 billion worth in 2024. That made up 30% all their imports from Russia, which is actually up from 17% in 2022. Russia is still their top supplier.
Still number one. Okay. What about energy? Gas?
Pipeline gas. It's way down from before, but still, 1.6 billion cubic meters flowed into the EU in 2024. That's nearly 12% of their total pipeline gas imports. Not zero. Certain countries, like Hungary, still rely on it under special deals.
And LNG, liquefied natural gas.
LNG, this one's striking. The EU imported 3.5 billion worth of Russian LNG in 2024. That's 16% of all their LNG imports.
16%?
And here's the kicker. That figure actually rose by about 12% in 2024 compared to 2023.
It went up.
Yes. Clear sign that energy security needs, especially replacing pipeline gas, outweighed the desire for a complete immediate break.
And uranium for the EU.
Enriched uranium. Same story as the U.S., really. They imported 2,800 tons in 2024. Absolutely crucial for nuclear plants in places like France and Hungary. Finding alternative fuel for these specific reactors is a massive long-term challenge.
Okay, let me try and put that in perspective for you listening. Yeah. Imagine this. The EU in 2024 spent more money just on Russian LNG and fertilizers
combined, yes,
than India spent on its entire purchase of Russian oil, which was around $36 billion.
That's correct.
That's not a small difference. It really underscores this selective nature of the narrative, doesn't it? Where India gets heavily criticized.
It highlights how the scale and type of dependencies vary wildly, and so does the criticism, it seems.
Now let's talk about how. This isn't just about what's bought, but how it manages to keep flowing. Our sources suggest this isn't about smugglers blatantly breaking rules. It's more about a system. Carefully engineered exemptions, maybe some routing tricks.
A masterclass in bending the rules without technically breaking them, perhaps?
So how does it work?
Well, delving deeper, the specifics are really revealing. First, you have the official channels, waivers and grace periods.
Like the uranium one we mentioned.
Exactly. The U.S. uranium ban announced in 2024 comes with explicit exemptions running until 2028, citing energy security.
Clear as day.
Similarly, EU LNG imports. No hard ban until March 2025. And even then, the first step was just restricting transshipment, not the buying itself.
And the general licenses?
Right. The U.S. Treasury maintains a public list of these, official authorizations allowing specific transactions that would otherwise be forbidden. It shows the system has built-in flexibility for national interest.
Okay, so that's the official stuff. What about the less visible methods?
Yes. The sources describe the rise of shadow fleets.
Shadow fleets? Sounds ominous.
It kind of is. These are untraceable tankers, often registered to shell companies in places like the UAE, Turkey, Hong Kong.
So they operate outside normal systems?
Pretty much. Outside conventional insurance, tracking, effectively masking the Russian origin of the oil they carry. It's deliberate obfuscation, allowing trade while avoiding direct accountability.
Clever in a way. What else?
Then there's third country routing, highly organized.
How does that work?
Think dual-use electronics things with both civilian and military uses, chemical intermediates, even luxury goods.
Okay.
They move through intermediary countries. Kazakhstan, Armenia, Turkey are often mentioned. Goods might start in Russia heading west or vice versa, but the pit stop blurs the origin or destination. It exploits gaps in tracking and enforcement.
A logistical dance, you called it.
Pretty much.
And there was one other category of exceptions.
Yes, a critical one, highlighted in official documents and analyses. Humanitarian and food security exceptions.
Fertilizers again.
Fertilizers are the prime example. Along with certain other agricultural products, they're explicitly exempt.
The argument being?
The argument, and it's a powerful one, is that restricting these would cause not just economic pain, but potentially widespread famine, especially in the global south. It's where geopolitics hits the wall of basic human needs. Pragmatic necessity.
Which brings us, inevitably, to what our sources call the hypocrisy argument.
It comes up a lot.
While the U.S. and EU maintain these, let's say, managed trade lifelines with Russia, nations like India get singled out.
Right. India's position, as the sources frame it, is, look, in 2024, we imported about $36 billion worth of Russian oil,
Okay.
which sounds like a lot, but it's only about 13% of Russia's total fossil fuel exports. And crucially, India refines that crude and exports the products, sometimes ironically, back to Europe.
And yet,
And yet, India faced those U.S. tariff threats up to 50% on totally unrelated goods like steel, electronics specifically because of this Russian trade. It creates this real perception of unfairness.
you see the disconnect, right? The Western narrative you hear is often that India is undermining sanctions,
Yeah.
prolonging the war.
That's the rhetoric.
But then you connect it to what we just discussed. The EU in 2024 spent more on Russian LNG and fertilizers than India did on oil.
Correct.
And arguably, U.S. dependence on Russian uranium for its power grid is proportionally greater than India's oil dependence. It kind of challenges the moral high ground, doesn't it?
It certainly raises serious questions about selective enforcement and the message that sends globally. When you look country by country, the reality checks are quite revealing.
Go on.
United States
Yeah.
imports uranium, palladium, fertilizers, rhetoric, energy independence, reality, core imports exempt for years.
Okay.
Germany imports LNG, fertilizers, rhetoric, cutting dependence, rapid green transition. Reality, Russian LNG volumes actually rose in 2024 before any bans.
France.
France imports uranium via its state company Orano, also LNG. Rhetoric, leading green transition. Reality, still buying Russian nuclear fuel.
And Hungary seems like a special case.
Hungary, very clear example. Imports pipeline gas under explicit EU exemptions. Openly opposes stricter sanctions. Maintains a very pro-Moscow energy policy. Shows the internal EU divisions, too.
And just to reiterate why fertilizers and uranium are seen as, well, untouchable.
It's stark. Russia and Belarus aren't just minor players. They are top global producers of key fertilizers, potash, nitrogen-based ones.
Vitals for farming.
Absolutely. Cutting that supply triggers immediate dramatic spikes in global food prices. It threatens lower crop yields, potentially famine, especially in vulnerable nations.
And uranium.
Russia controls about 20% of global enrichment capacity. Many U.S. and EU reactors are specifically designed for Russian fuel alternatives. Building them takes 5–10 years minimum. These are profound systemic dependencies.
Not easily fixed.
Definitely not. And this is crucial for you, listening, to grasp. These aren't minor items you can just swap out. The risks to global food and energy security are huge, potentially catastrophic.
Like the fertilizer crisis in 2022.
Exactly. Prices surged 120%. Directly threatened crops, raise the specter of famine. Or imagine a full ban on Russian LNG. Now it could easily spike European energy prices 30–40%. Testing resilience, hitting household budgets hard, especially in winter. These are the real-world consequences driving these difficult compromises.
So wrapping this up, what does it all mean for the global stage? For how countries see each other?
Well, our sources point to this clear, undeniable political messaging gap.
Between words and actions.
Precisely. The public message from the U.S. and EU is unity, cutting ties, pain being worth it for democracy.
That's the official line.
The quiet reality, though, certain imports are just too strategic, too embedded to ditch immediately. Phase-outs are slow, exemptions are large, trade continues maybe just less visibly.
And this creates
A significant credibility gap. A chasm between rhetoric and reality. And this fuels strong perceptions, particularly in the global south, that sanctions aren't about universal principles, but fundamentally about protecting Western economic interests. Imagine you're a leader in a developing nation. You're told to make painful sacrifices for the greater good. Then you see these exceptions being made by richer countries for their needs. It erodes trust.
which makes future cooperation harder.
Much harder. On climate, pandemics, you name it, because the perception is the rules apply differently depending on who you are.
So that's a key takeaway for you.
Yeah.
Yes, sanctions have had an impact. Russian-European trade is down massively, over 80%. Moscow's fossil fuel income from Europe is hit. But
the narrative of total economic isolation, it's misleading.
because the U.S. still imports hundreds of millions in Russian uranium, palladium, fertilizers, the EU still buys billions in fertilizers, LNG, uranium.
Still flowing.
And India, while criticized, imports less in relative fossil fuel terms than these Western blocs do of other critical stuff.
Yeah.
It's a complex web. Resists easy labels.
So connecting this to the future, what's next? Well, the plans are there. Repower EU, the U.S. push for domestic uranium. They're aiming to close these gaps by, say, 2027, 2028.
But until then,
Until then, expect continued Russian fertilizer and uranium exports to the West. Expect LNG and pipeline gas flowing to some EU states under exemptions.
uh,
And unfortunately, probably expect continued criticism of other nations for doing, in different categories, what the West itself is still doing. Which brings us back to that big question. Can you build true global cooperation when perceived double standards undermine trust so deeply?
and that really wraps up our deep dive into this complex, often contradictory web of global trade, sanctions, and strategic dependencies.
Yeah.
What started with such strong condemnation, bold statements, it's evolved into this very nuanced, undeniably pragmatic reality, shaped by economic necessity, by global market stability.
We've definitely explored how those high-minded principles often collide head-on with pragmatic realities, forcing these major powers to constantly balance their geopolitical goals with the very real, immediate needs of their economies, their populations. And the data we looked at, it unequivocally shows, for some vital commodities, total trade isolation from Russia. It remains incredibly challenging, if not outright impossible, in the short to medium term.
So for you, our listener, we really hope this deep dive has provided a clear-eyed, maybe unvarnished look at the inconsistencies, the strategic compromises that define global trade today. It's just a powerful reminder, isn't it? International relations are rarely black and white, rarely simple, almost always painted in these complex, sometimes uncomfortable shades of economic gray.
It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? If the ultimate goal of sanctions is to compel a change in behavior, to uphold international norms, what message is actually sent when the enforcers themselves can't or won't fully stick to the same rules they apply so vigorously to others? What does that do for the future of global governance?
Absolutely. A crucial question. We invite you to keep pondering that delicate, vital balance, power, economics, ethics, long after this deep dive ends. Thank you for joining us on the deep dive.